2, 1, go. All right. Well, welcome everybody back to the Legacy Discipleship podcast. Bill Dupenthaler here with Mike Conan, and we are so grateful for you and so excited to have you be a part of our discussions. And Mike, I'm excited about today's discussion because this is one of my favorite all-time books that we're gonna talk about a little bit today. Master Plan of Evangelism. And you've read this many times too, I guess.
Yeah, well, it certainly is a good man-sized book, like it's not 500 pages, it's like 100 small pages. It's
maybe that's why.
Right?
Yeah, maybe that's why I like it so much. It's a short book. We talk about goals for the year and what do they call it? The New Year's resolutions. And I know some of the groups I've talked with, often people say, I'm going to read, 4 books a year, 1 a quarter. I'm going to read 6 books, 1 every other month, or 12 once a month. And so this is a good book to put on that list because you'll get through it.
It's like memorizing scripture, memorizing Jesus wept,
Jesus wept. Yeah, exactly. But this book, The Master Plan of Evangelism by Robert Coleman, it's been around for a long time. And way back when I was on Young Life staff, even my early years in the 80s and 90s, this book was so instrumental in helping me to really formulate my approach for ministry all those years. And we used to have like these big Young Life ministries and lots of people, and people would always ask, well, how do you do it? How do you get all these people out and all those kinds of things? And if we got into enough of a discussion about it, I would often point back to the principles in this book. I'd say, well, there's a little book called Master Plan of Evangelism, and we used to always look at it as this idea of reaching the masses through discipling a few, and that's kind of what this book is about. I mean, he talks about the principles that Jesus employed to reach the world, the the plan of evangelism. So that's what we're going to talk about today and the next few weeks, and I think it's just really going to be a fun discussion to kind of go through and get some of the highlights from this book and share it with all you guys, and I think you're going to really enjoy it. I want to start just by a couple of short little paragraphs from the preface from this book, and I think this will really help you to see kind of where we're going in this whole thing. It says, objective and relevance. These are the crucial issues of our work. Both are interrelated, objective and relevance. And the measure by which they are compatible will largely determine the significance of all of our activity. Merely because we're busy or even skilled doing something does not necessarily mean that we're getting anything accomplished. The question must always be asked, is it worth doing and does it get the job done? This is a question that should be posed continually in relation to the evangelistic activity of the church or whatever ministry you happen to be involved in. So here's the question. Are our efforts to keep things going, are those efforts fulfilling the Great Commission of Christ? Do we see an ever-expanding company of dedicated people reaching the world with the gospel as a result of our ministry? That we are busy trying to do the work and to do evangelistic programs and those kind of things, that cannot be denied. But are we accomplishing our objective to reach the world for Christ? And so that's what this book is about. It's the idea of, can we really evaluate what we're doing and answer the question, is it really fulfilling the Great Commission?
That really is a foundational thing, isn't it? When we think about anything that we're doing. And I come from the church background, and you've been in church forever too, so we can both speak to that.
Yeah.
And I love his language too, the way that he talks about the church. And that's the place where this is meant to be done, is in the
Yeah.
context of believers gathered together in unity. And I love that idea. And we could have a long discussion about church, what it is and isn't. But one of the things that is clear is the mission given to the church is to go and make disciples. And so
Yeah.
everything that we're doing should be measured against how we're doing with the mission that Christ has given to us. And I think that's such a great way to think about everything. Okay, we say Jesus is Lord. Well, what has the Lord told us to do? And and we talked about this last week a little bit with Rick Warren's, book that kind of separated evangelism and discipleship, worship, and all those things out. But I think as you and I process this, couldn't agree more that whatever we're doing, the bottom line is it working, right?
Yeah, and is whatever we're doing the thing that God's really called us to be doing? And that's the other thing. I think. Well, we were chatting a little bit about if this is maybe my favorite book, maybe your favorite book is Experiencing God by Blackaby, and
Yeah, that's fair to say.
and he talks about in that book this idea of people kind of going about ministry, you know, strategies backwards, kind of like, well, this is what I want to do to serve you, God, and now would you bless it? Instead of asking the Lord, well, what is it that you want me to do? And I'll do it.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yeah. It's our American nature, to be honest. Maybe one could even say Western culture nature to say, I'm the center, you join me, Lord, instead of, Lord, you're the center, let me join you.
You're the master, I'm the servant. I don't get to pick my jobs. I just do what you tell me to do.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. So this book is the Master Plan of Evangelism. And he goes through, there's 8 short little chapters, 8 guiding principles of Jesus' plan to reach the world. And so we're gonna focus in a little bit today just on chapter 1. And the title of the chapter is Selection. And so Mike, why don't you kick us off kind of on this first little point?
Well, before we jump there, I wanted to say, because one of the things I appreciated about the preface of the book too was this idea that Jesus didn't just do things randomly.
Oh,
And,
right. Yeah.
and that part of our job is to figure out what is the master calling us to, but also what did the master do? Jesus is the master. So what did he do? And how does he want us to emulate that? And so one of the things is we read through the gospels, and again, we're not focused on just these 4 chapters of the Bible, people read the whole Bible. But as we think about this particular area, we want to think about, well, what did Jesus do and how did he do it? Was it planned, purposeful? Was it strategic? Or was it just random? Like, did he just randomly go and heal people? Did he just randomly go and visit people's houses? Did he randomly invite people to follow him? Or was it purposeful? Was it strategic? Was he actually trying to create something that would carry on after he was done? And I think both
Yeah.
of us have become persuaded that Jesus did this very purposefully. And he wanted whatever he was doing to be able to carry on after he was done. And
Yeah.
his purpose and plan was to see people come to know the Lord, the triune God of the universe, to come into a right relationship with God, and then to walk in wholeness with that God afterwards. And
Yeah.
so he had a specific plan and way that he did that. And I think that in the book here, I do think that Coleman does do a good job of kind of unpacking that plan. And that's why you get to those 8 guiding, principles of the plan.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was going to mention too, I'm glad you brought that up, Mike, because I wanted to challenge people. And it doesn't matter which one. You could take any of the 4 gospels and try reading one of the gospels with the specific idea of looking for Jesus' strategy of discipleship. If you can read one of the gospels just through the lens of, okay, what was Jesus doing? How was he carrying out this plan? And what you begin to see is like what appears to be random things, like he's talking to people and healing people and giving little talks to groups, you begin to see that, oh my gosh, it was all really really strategic and really focused. And you know, yes, he gives the Sermon on the Mount, and yes, he tells a parable, like the parable of the seed and the sower, but then he pulls aside with the disciples and they say, oh no, Jesus, what did you mean when you said that? And he says, okay, listen, I'm not explaining this to everybody, but here's what I meant. It's just for you guys, and so that principle is so cool to look at.
Yeah. And so as we think about that Jesus did what he did on purpose. He had a strategy, he had
Yeah.
a mission, and then he wanted that to carry on. He was very clear at the end, and this is your job now. You go and make disciples. And
Yeah.
then he says, and love one another as I have loved you. And he's do as and Paul carries on, imitate me as I follow Christ. So it's that whole same thing.
Yeah.
So the first principle, and it's in chapter 1, is what the whole chapter is about. And this is the only one we're going to have time to cover today, but it's on selection. And we've talked about this in a couple of different ways. We've also looked at it and talked about it in terms of inviting. We've also talked about it, in the context of how do you know who to invest in, or how does it work? And so this whole chapter, as he's Coleman's kind of unpacking it, is about how Jesus fulfilled his mission. And the first thing that he did is he was picky. And by picky, it means that he made choices. He said yes to some and no to others. And that leads us to kind of the first principle that we see here is Jesus focused on leaders, not converts. And Jesus' attention was on developing leaders, not converts. And the quote that I liked, and I know you did too, is his concern was not with programs to reach the multitudes, but with men whom the multitudes would follow. Let me read that again. His concern was not with programs to reach the multitudes, but with men whom the multitudes would follow.
Yeah.
What stands out
Yeah.
to you about that line, Bill?
Well, it's interesting, and both of us having been in vocational ministry for a long time, we've experienced this a lot, and that is beating your head against the wall, trying to reach somebody that doesn't really want to be reached.
Yeah.
and the principle in the Bible of well, there's a couple things I'm trying to say at the same time. One is the idea of shake the dust off your feet and move on to the next town if they don't receive you. It's so hard when you want so badly for someone to know Christ, and you want so badly for someone to be connected to the body of Christ, and to do those things, and you just can't force it, and you lead a horse to water but can't make it drink, and all that kind of stuff, and so there's that, and then there's this principle of you got to invest in the people that are really going to be I mean, I don't know how to say it in a, I guess, in a politically correct way, but that worth investing in. I mean, everybody's worth investing in, of course, and God loves everyone. But sometimes there are people that they're leaders, and they're people that are ready to take on what God's called them to do. And we talk about sometimes fan the flame, and you see that in people. And when you see someone that is ready to be used by God, and wants to be used by God, and wants to be a leader of people, I mean, those are the ones that you invest in, not the ones that you're beating your head against the wall.
Well, if I were to offer my 2 cents here with this quote, his concern was not with programs to reach the multitudes, but with men whom the multitudes would follow. I will tell you, working in the church, I've worked in 3 different larger churches, so 1,000+ people there. And every single time the pressure was on to bigger, better, bigger, better, bigger, better. The numbers were always, how many people are coming? How many converts did you have? And still the church, today there's, and that was so ingrained in my head. But I'll
Hmm.
tell you, I am not convinced that that was the best idea. And again, I'm not against that idea per se, but I had a class, for instance, in one of those churches. I taught a Sunday school class when I was in seminary, and there were 12 to 13 people in the class. Okay, so it was in a large church, pretty small. The other class had 30 people in it. I think they were the two young adult classes. Of that class, every single one of those people became full-time ministry people. Either they married somebody who was in full-time ministry, or they themselves went into full-time ministry. And I think that there may have been a couple now who are not in it anymore. But I look at that and I think, man, there is something about this idea of, if you can get, and that, and you wouldn't look at those people and say, boy, those are all the quote unquote leaders, And I
Yeah.
think that's
Yeah.
one of the things that I appreciated about what the way that Coleman tackles this is, and I don't think that's what you were saying either, Bill, but is, don't be so consumed with numbers. Don't be
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
consumed with, and if you're in young life, how big is your club? If you're in the church, it's how big is your church? And I tell you, I would tell people all the time, the church I was at was the fastest growing church in our presbytery for 5 of the 8 years I was there, I think. And so it was like, okay, well, that's awesome, but that's not focusing on the things that were going to bring long-term,
Yeah.
real, change. And I think that's what I stood out to me about that first thought is, you know, what's really going to make a difference is not addition, but multiplication.
Yeah.
And then I think that as he's talking about, and that's why I think this little segue could be helpful too, is what do we look for in a leader? And Coleman talks about it a little bit about how did Jesus pick his leaders? What stood out to you when you were reading that section on Jesus and how he picked his leaders?
Well, before I answer that, I was going to make one other comment about the whole numbers thing, and
Yeah,
because I think a lot of people struggle with this idea, just because naturally we're human and we want to appear successful and appear like we've got the really happening deal. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with having a big crowd and having a happening thing. That's super cool, but that's not the goal. But one of the things I've been learning a lot in the last couple of years is to really like believe that the Lord has His hand on what you're doing. If you've prayed and asked God to lead you, and He's led you into doing what you're doing, then like believe that He's got His hand on it, and so try to let go of some of your expectations of
yeah,
what it's supposed to be in your mind. So if you've got a small group and there's 6 people, and on one particular occasion there's just you and one other person that shows up,
yeah,
instead of like being, oh man, gosh, where's everybody else? This is kind of a bummer. Uh, instead of that, it's like, wow, isn't this awesome? The two of us have this time together today, just the two of us. Man, God must have something really special planned, and to look at it from that perspective. So, but yeah, but this idea of
a great way
getting
to
back.
look at it. I mean, if I could, just jump in and I
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
totally agree with you. Like there's another thing, another way which you touched on, but I think is an even bigger issue is don't let your identity be in the success, quote unquote, of your ministry.
yeah,
Nobody today would hire Jesus to be their pastor. Nobody.
yeah,
I mean, nobody would hire him to be their young life leader. Uh, Based on his numbers and track record, and uh, the fact that he was wandering all the time and only investing in these 12 people, there'd be so many angry parents in young life that you'd have to deal with. And in the church, the Pharisees would be upset because they weren't getting enough attention. Jesus, wouldn't even be hired today in the modern church. So
yeah,
don't feel like, man, my identity needs to fall into the Pharisees trap, which is more prestige, more honor based on stuff that doesn't matter. And I think that that's a challenge. And so if we think about the question, and I'll put it back to you now, is so what stood out to you when he was talking about the leaders that Jesus picked, these early disciples? Uh, was there anything in those pages that kind of stood out to you?
Well, I just like the idea, and you see this theme like throughout the Bible too, that God calls ordinary, everyday people. Now
Yeah.
sometimes he calls kings and queens, and sometimes he calls, great leaders that are already recognized great leaders. But so often, in fact, it seems like pretty much most of the time, God calls ordinary people to be those ones that he's going to use, the ones that he's gonna put in positions of leadership, who are going to change the world. And I think that's the principle that stood out to me more than anything.
I think that, yeah, and that's what he said. And Jesus always had the purpose of the mission in mind. And that's the other part that stood out to me, is his mission was to get people who he knew that would he could mold into becoming what he wanted to see happen. And those would be, of course, become disciple makers themselves. These folks would carry on his mission. And in my mind, that's what a leader is.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes we get so caught up in, and I've told you before, the tension I feel like, in the church, and one of the churches that I've attended in the last few weeks, the pastor said something along the lines of, well, we, have our heads on a swivel trying to find quote unquote leaders. And I'm like, why isn't everyone considered a possible leader? What makes someone
Yeah.
a leader or not? And you could say, well, they've already have a following. And then you're like, okay, well, why do they have that following? Is it because of their personality? Is it because of their looks? Is it because of their money? Is it because of other things? Or is it because of their heart? And is it because of the Lord? And I would rather have a leader who's, got maybe less of a following at this point, but somebody who the Lord could really teach and mold to become that next thing. And that leads us to the next one. I'll let you pick it up right there with the next little thought.
Well, here's a great quote from the book. It says, "Their mannerisms may have been awkward and their abilities limited, but with the exception of the traitor, their hearts were big." Their hearts were big. And man, give me somebody with a big heart, and I'll take that person over the flashy person any day.
What do you think it means to have a big heart, Bill? Like, I love that quote too. Read it again and then tell us what it means to have a big heart. This is good.
Their mannerisms may have been awkward and their abilities limited, which, by the way, so he's describing most of us. But with the exception of the traitor, Judas, their hearts were big. And when I think of somebody with a big heart, somebody that really deeply cares about people, really deeply loves the Lord, someone who has a realistic understanding of who they are, and is not proud or arrogant, but rather someone who realizes that when they submit to the Lord and trust God with everything in their lives, that it's like, man, God, would you use me? God, would you place me in positions where I can make a difference in people's lives? Those are the kind of people, man, give me some of those.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like, the central thing that comes to mind with somebody with a big heart is the love of Christ just exudes from them. And their love for the Lord, their love for people, it just comes out. And often with that comes like you said, a humility, but also, dare I say it, a awkwardness at times, because maybe they may not be the strongest intellect in the world. They may not overthink everything like Peter, but instead they're right in the middle. Their heart is pulling them wherever it's pulling them. And John, same thing, and so it's like that moment where those people really do stand out to me too. And I want to have that big heart too. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's many things that have been written on that over the years. I think the other part that stands out too from the book, and another line is you're also looking for teachable people,
Yeah.
people who want to learn and grow. Like that's the other thing that Jesus, I think, looked for. And you could tell by his interactions with the Pharisees that he made a wise choice by not picking them, because they did not want to learn and grow from him, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and so that's the difference, I think, between the Pharisees, who had been normal for a rabbi to pick somebody like that, and these guys, is they were more humble. They were willing to learn. Jesus saw in these simple men, this is the quote, the potential of leadership for the kingdom. They were indeed unlearned and ignorant, according to the world standards, Acts 4:13, but were teachable. And
Yeah.
you've talked about that at length, that being teachable in your, what you look for is that somebody with a big heart who's teachable. I think that's just a great descriptor of the type of people that Jesus invested in, the type of people that we should be looking for. And when
Yeah.
we're thinking about this idea of selection, who do we select? And when you're focusing on leaders, these are the people that we think of. We think of leaders teachable with big hearts,
Yeah.
teachable
Yeah.
with big hearts, right?
Oh yeah. And it's funny. I mean, I love the way you said all that, because especially in the last few years since we've been doing legacy,
Yeah,
I mean, I've approached, a lot of different guys, and talked to them about these things and being disciples who make disciples, and being a leader, and all the stuff we're talking about right now. And I've been amazed how many guys have said, yeah, yeah, I'm good. That's okay. I mean, that's cool that you're doing that, but yeah, really, it's okay. I'm good. And
yeah,
not very teachable, and not very humble. And again, not that if someone doesn't want to get involved with legacy, that means that they're a bad guy, or they're not
yeah,
following Jesus. Obviously, of course, that's not true. But it is interesting, man. Um, and I tend to be a pretty, cast the net pretty wide guy, so,
yeah,
and you do too. We've talked about this, I mean, it's like, I'm going to throw it out there to everybody, man, just like Jesus did, come follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men. And so, we cast those metaphoric nets wide, and, and then ask the Lord God, bring us the ones that you want, just like Jesus prayed before he called his disciples. Bring us the ones that you want us to really invest in, those ones, the few that are going to go change the world. And so often I've got in my mind, who I'm kind of thinking is going to be the one, and oftentimes that's the one that says, yeah, it's okay, I'm good. And then the one
exactly.
that is not the
Yes,
one I had in mind is the one that says, oh my gosh, I would love to be doing that.
yeah, like the friend who's at the group. Yes, had that happen thousands of times. It feels like, even though
Yeah.
it's been less. Well, we better shift gears here as we wind it down.
Yeah.
So not only do you want to make a selection, but he argues that you don't want to have too big of a group, and I think that there's something really to that, because the bottom line is Jesus picked people so that they could be with him, the master, and he still ministered to the crowds. He still ministered to all these people, but he primarily, during his 3 years of ministry, devoted himself to the 12. And if you read it even closer, he even devoted and gave more special experiences to the three, to Peter, James, and John. And
Yep.
the first quote that kind of dug in with me on this was, "One cannot transform a world except as individuals in the world are transformed, and individuals cannot be changed except as they are molded in the hands of the master."
Hmm.
And you and I had a discussion about this earlier, Bill, but what do you think it means to be molded in the hands of the master? Let's just say, for argument's sake, that we agree on the first part there. What does it mean to be molded in the hands of the master?
Well, I mean, so we were kind of chatting about that. Well, if we're supposed to be imitating what Jesus did, and Jesus, certainly in the Gospels, he was the master who was
Ah,
discipling his guys. So does that mean that this is saying that now we become the master, and the people under us are our disciples, and so they are being
Sounds
molded
weird,
in
doesn't
the
it?
hands of the master.
Yeah, it
And
just sounds
so
weird to say that, doesn't it? Like to call
yeah,
ourselves the
yeah,
master, it seems weird, right?
yeah. Well, I sleep in the master bedroom of our house, so I don't know, but
Yeah,
no, we're not the master. The
yeah,
master is Jesus. Jesus is the master,
capital
and
M.
you're the capital M, and and he is the one who molds people's lives by spending time with him, and praying and letting him teach us and reading his word, and all the things that we talk about in terms of going to church, and being taught, and reading good books like Master Plan of Evangelism, those kind of things. That's how he molds us.
Yeah, and God though does that through his people, as we were talking about earlier too. That's one of the things that we both have learned over the years is yes, it's being done by the master, but the master uses his people to do his work. And so that's where the Holy Spirit dwells in you and me, and the Holy Spirit overflows to each other. The next line, I like this too. I'm just going to read it because I like it. It also graphically illustrates a fundamental principle of teaching that other things being equal, the more concentrated the size of the group being taught, the greater the opportunity for effective instruction. In other words, hey, if the group gets too big, you lose your effectiveness.
Yeah,
And again, we don't have to even spend a lot of time on that. We could just agree and say, if you have a group of 12 people, uh, it's going to be one experience. If you have a group of 3 people, it's going to be one experience. If you have a group of 70 plus people, it's going to be an entirely different experience. And we want to be cultivating more and more groups of 3 and 12 and those type of things, so that those groups can then multiply.
yeah. And really, I mean, Jesus had 12, and even Jesus lost one. So really, in the end, 11.
He
So
was the son of God.
yeah,
So
yeah, he was
yeah,
pretty darn good at it. So
yeah,
so really, man, uh, again, smaller the better in some ways, and yet, you know, keeping in mind the goal is to reach the masses, but Jesus is teaching, and certainly Coleman in the Master Plan of Evangelism is teaching, that it's the focus on the few is where the power really is. So Jesus devoted most of his remaining life on earth to these few disciples. He literally staked his whole ministry on really those 11 guys. The
yeah,
world could be indifferent towards him and still not defeat his strategy, because his strategy was to invest in those few, and that was it. That's what he did. And so we got to
yeah.
follow that strategy. That's what this is saying. That Master Plan of Evangelism: invest in a few.
Yes, and then train them to invest in a few.
Right.
So let me just end it with a couple of quotes here for inspiration, and then we'll wind it down. Jesus was not trying to impress the crowd, but to usher in a kingdom. This meant that he needed people who could lead the multitudes. And then the bottom line, this is the last paragraph of this introductory first chapter. We must decide where we want our ministry to count. In the momentary applause of popular recognition, or in the reproduction of our lives in a few chosen people who will carry on our work after we are gone. Really, it is a question of which generation are we living for? And that
Sounds
seemed
like
like
legacy.
it seemed like a great quote to end on, didn't it, for us? If we think about leaving a legacy, is the way we live legacy is investing in a few. And
Yeah.
we want to thank you for listening to this podcast. And if you are interested in the Master Plan of Evangelism, we want to give that to you for free. So for any donation that you give to Legacy, we will send you the Master Plan of Evangelism for free. And we'd love for you to be reading it with us. These next podcasts, we're going to go through the next 7 principles of this Master Plan of Evangelism. And each one will be just like this one here, where it'll give you some profound thought and insight into your life as you try to become a disciple who makes disciples. And you can always check out more at ourtruelegacy.com. I also think this would be a great time for you if you've got a friend who hasn't listened to this podcast yet. This would be a great time for them to jump on board over these next few weeks as we unpack this master plan of evangelism, because they're going to be getting some great inspirational stuff that can maybe help them rethink their life it's not a coincidence that we decided to do this after January and for New Year's resolutions and those things. Again, just want to, yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Oh, and maybe you're about to say this, but I was going to also say, and speaking of leaders, we are starting in a couple of weeks our next leadership training class, and we do it on Zoom, so it doesn't matter where you are in the world. We'd love to have you be a part of it, but you need to get signed up quickly because we're going to be starting in just a couple of weeks, and so let us know if you're interested in being a part of that. It's not a huge commitment. I think it's once a month on Zoom, and then one time in between each of those where Mike or myself will meet with you.
Fantastic. And I was even going to say, take it a step further and say, if you're listening to this and you're in the Gig Harbor or Tacoma or Puget Sound area here, and you're in a small group and you think you've got folks who would love to become disciples, who want to make disciples, and might be even interested in this leadership program, Bill or I would love to come out to your small group and talk to you guys about this. And same if you're in a church and you got an opportunity and we could come to your church, we'd love to do that, tell more about what we're doing.
Yeah.
All that to say, though, we do appreciate you listening to the podcast. We do appreciate you sharing it. And we appreciate our friendship and also this partnership in the gospel of Jesus Christ to take this mission to the world and let us all become people who are disciples who make disciples. Amen.